Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Hi there.
Are you ready to explore the experience of time itself?
I'm intrigued.
Because we are diving into your source material today, going deep into excerpts from pasted text. Specifically, we're looking at a podcast transcript called Every Clock is a Handgun in My Autistic Time by Johnny Profane. And let me tell you, Profane, who identifies as both autistic and ADHD, really doesn't hold back. Trust me, this deep dive is about way more than just autism. It makes us think about everything we think we know about what time even is.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. And to help unpack the science and the wider implications of Profane's experiences, we're joined by, well, an expert in, you could say neuroscience, but really in the experience of time itself.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Let's dive right in. So Profane starts off with this, really powerful metaphor. He says, every clock is a handgun pointed at my head. It's such a visceral image.
It is.
Like, it really gets under your skin.
Yeah.
And he's really talking about that feeling of dread, that we often kind of associate with deadlines and obligations, that constant pressure of time, just measured out in seconds and minutes and hours.
It's palpable, that anxiety, just in those words.
Right. But then Profane contrasts this with something totally different when he feels outside of time, totally immersed in joy and flow.
Interesting. Almost like what we call a flow state, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That feeling of being so engrossed in something that you lose track of everything else.
Right.
Time just fades away. And while lots of people experience these flow states, they can be especially intense for neurodivergent individuals.
Yeah, and Profane actually gives a really relatable example. He talks about struggling with deadlines, like this 10-page paper he had to write, and how frustrating it was for both him and the people around him.
Sounds like a classic example of what many people with ADHD and autism experience. Time blindness.
Right.
A very real struggle to accurately estimate how long tasks will take.
And I think it's interesting how Profane brings in this Māori concept of Takiwātanga, meaning in his or her own time and space.
It is such a powerful concept.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a definition, right? It's a completely different way of looking at neurodiversity as a different way of being, not a deficit. And this idea of Takiwātanga makes you realize how often we impose our sense of time on others, right? Especially in work or school.
Absolutely.
And it begs the question, what if we embraced a more flexible approach?
Yeah.
One that recognizes different rhythms and ways of working. Could that be beneficial for everyone?
And this is where things get even more interesting, because Profane doesn't just rely on his personal experiences. He actually goes into the actual science of autistic time perception.
Right. Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
He does mention that, the research is still developing and it can be kind of contradictory.
Of course. Yeah.
Which is important to keep in mind, right?
Yeah, so
as we sort of explore this a little bit further.
Yeah, it's a complex field, and there's still a lot we're learning about how our brains perceive time. For example, some studies using EEG have shown that autistic individuals, they might process temporal information differently, like at a neural level.
It's like their internal clock is wired a bit differently.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
But then, like Profane points out, there are other studies, behavioral studies, using tasks like time reproduction. And those haven't, consistently found these clear differences between, autistic and non-autistic individuals. So it's, yeah.
So how do we make sense of that?
Right.
When it seems like those are kind of contradictory findings.
Right. Well, that's the thing about scientific research.
Yeah.
It's not always a straight line to the answer.
Right.
So instead of seeing them as contradictions, maybe these findings highlight just how complex the experience of time really is.
Okay.
And it's probably influenced by a whole bunch of factors, both individual and contextual, which makes it a really personal experience when you think about it.
It really makes you kind of go back and think, maybe we take a lot for granted.
Yeah.
When we're talking about something like time, right?
Yeah.
Which I guess leads to the big question, right? Why does any of this even matter for those of us listening who, maybe aren't autistic, haven't had that direct experience with autism?
I think that's such an important point to bring up, because one of the biggest takeaways here is, I think it's empathy.
Yeah.
When we really try to understand how other people experience the world differently, even something, as basic as time, it allows us to connect on this whole other level.
Yeah, we're stepping outside of ourselves for a minute.
Exactly.
And seeing things through someone else's eyes, right?
And I think, Profane's experiences really challenge us to question our own assumptions about time.
Right.
Because is it this fixed universal experience?
Mm.
Or is it actually much more personal and fluid?
Right, which can be a pretty profound realization for a lot of people.
It can be.
Yeah.
But I think those moments of discomfort, those moments where you have to kind of step outside of what you think you know, those are the moments where real growth and understanding can actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Recognizing the diversity of human experience, including how we each experience something as, fundamental as time. I think it can only lead to, greater understanding and inclusion, and ultimately a more compassionate world.
At the end here, Profane describes time as this one-way street, always moving forward, always getting shorter. And it's a really powerful image. And I was thinking, if he experiences time as these peaks and troughs, these joyous flow states and these agonizing stretches of dread, how much of that is about being autistic? And how much of that is about all the pressures and expectations of a world that's built on a very different clock? A world that maybe doesn't allow for those natural rhythms, those moments of what he called Takiwātanga.
That is such a thought-provoking question, and it's something we can all consider, regardless of how we experience time personally.
I love that. And that is the beauty of a deep dive like this. It kind of leaves us with more questions than answers, but in a way that feels exciting and not overwhelming,
Yeah, for sure.
Like it's an invitation to keep exploring, to keep learning, to keep challenging our own perspectives, right?
Exactly.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Oh, it was a pleasure to be here.
And to you, the listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Be sure to check out Johnny Profane's work in pasted text. It's a wild ride, let's just say, in all the best ways. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep those minds open.